To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meier Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meier Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us. Everyone, this is Kristen Walker, and I am hosting The Clinical Christian. We have the amazing and wonderful and talented, and she's going to say stop already, Dr. Lisa Day on today, and we're going to talk about a couple of different statements that she sent in. One of them is, you cannot truthfully say yes until you can comfortably say no, and how to be me without losing you. And guess what those are a lot about? Boundaries. We all have, all of us need work with boundaries. Are they too strong? Are they not strong enough? What's your childhood about? So we're going to delve into all those kind of things and get into it about boundaries. But first, I want to say, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on and doing the show again.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Kristen.
So why this topic? Because you're the one that sent it in. Why this one is important and rings a bell with you?
Absolutely. I believe the boundaries are cornerstone to relationship, meaning we can't have a healthy sense of connectedness unless we can have a healthy sense of separateness. So one of our challenges in all relationships are how to establish this healthy attachment, but still remain an individual. You know, what happens when we don't agree with someone we love? How can we be me and not lose you? But one thing that I always want us to keep in mind with the concept of boundaries is not giving our power away. So not allowing someone to say something that has gives a negative tone over how we feel or about ourselves or other things. How can we hold our power?
Oh, and that's rough because some things get you right in the gut, and and it's really hard in that moment not to just give your power away to that.
Absolutely, and being aware of guilt trips. So when people guilt us into changing our mind or to doing something that we don't want to do, often if we feel resentment or bitterness, that's an indication that our boundaries need to be worked on or perhaps defined. If people who complain a lot about other things, I hate my job, I hate my work, I hate my house, the blame shifting, that's an indication that there's some challenges with boundaries. Often people don't think about it, but when we hold grudges against other people, and while that will include forgiveness, but when we hold grudges, that's a boundary issue, or at least that's where it presents into therapy, that perhaps there's some need for boundary. Letting people bring out the worst in us. So if we lose control of our temper, or we cuss or kick the dog or throw something across the room, that's a boundary issue. And when we talk about other people, when we talk negatively about other people, gossip, that's an indication. So these are the kinds of things that present in therapy, and we want to, take a deeper look to look at what's going on. Is this person taking responsibility for who they are and who they are not?
What I find fascinating about, the act of therapy is, how do you as a therapist, first of all, maintain your own boundaries if you're being triggered or, something's coming up for you in a session. So there's that. But also, how do you peel back the truths that are going on that you see with a client instead of getting invested in the story that they're trying to tell you about themselves?
That's a very good question. One of the things that is, again, cornerstone to the work that I do, and it throws people at first, but I ask people, and I take my hand and I put it right on my heart, and I'll ask them, what is the truth in your heart? And I challenge them, in all that you do, what is your truth? So a friend says, hey, we'd like to stop by and bring over a meal tonight and have dinner. we want to first go to, what is my truth? We may think, wow, that's nice of them. I shouldn't say no. They may feel bad if I say no. But if my truth is, all I want to do is go home, take a bath, get my book and read, how can I listen to that truth and then be able to communicate it with what I say under an umbrella of grace? And so much of boundaries is cornerstone to boundaries is first and foremost in all that you do, checking in and listening to the truth in your heart. But then the other challenge that a lot of people have is, how do I communicate that in a loving, kind, compassionate way? Because when we have boundaries, reasons people don't communicate boundaries is they're afraid of being unkind, they're afraid of hurting other people's feelings,
Right.
they're afraid of losing relationship or connection, companionship. And so there's lots of reasons why people don't have boundaries. First and foremost is that they don't know the truth of who they are. But then the second main component is they don't know how to communicate it in a way that is kind, loving, and going to be well received. So in a clinic setting, that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to say, so you're frustrated with your friends who come over and won't leave, or they've been there for 3 weeks and they won't leave your house. You love them, you want them to be there, but they've overextended their welcome in this, resort town that you live in. And so, I'm going to say, well, what is your truth? And your truth is, I love these people, but a 3 to 4 day stay works for me, not a 3 to 4 week stay. And so then the challenge is, how do I then bring that into relationship and say, I love you guys, and I always want my home to be open to you. However, we need to wind this down, as I truly do need my space and time in order to navigate through this thing we call life.
Right, exactly. And I know for a lot of people, they will go to therapy and their entire goal is to get the therapist to like them and be their cheerleader. And sometimes they're putting on a persona for their therapist. And that's where it can be difficult, I think, too, for a therapist to go, okay, how do you find what the underlying issue is when that's their entire goal, is to get you to like them so much?
Well, and so that's a good point. Again, one of the basic tenets of boundaries is responsibility. So one of the things that I do always in a first session, or at least the first or second session when I meet with somebody, is we want to gently put that responsibility on our client's lap. And so one of the things I will say is that if you were sitting with a friend or a loved one, 3, 6 months from now, and you said the best thing I ever did was step foot in Lisa's office, what would be different? How would you know that your time in therapy was truly helpful in getting you to where you want to be? And that's really with regard to how they operate in this thing we call life, because boundaries are all about me. Boundaries are all about who I am and how I operate, what my feelings are, what my beliefs are, what my view on finances, physical activity, where I live, where I don't live, my online presence. That's a big one these days, whether I do Facebook or don't do Facebook. And so when I challenge them to, where would you be if this was an effective use of your time? We're looking at operating system. We're looking at who I am and how I navigate my vessel through this thing we call life. More often than not, what's going to present to therapy for me is my brother, my mother, my dog, my friend. Lots of, this person is causing me pain. This person is causing me stress. This person is ruining my life. This person is making me rage. This person is making me drink. This person, and they're not wrong in that, but one of the main tasks or challenges in therapy then is to move back and say, where is it that you're giving your power away? When you threw your kid's cell phone across the wall and it broke, what was the tipping point? Where is it that you gave your power away to pick up that phone and throw it? And then how can we bring that back so that we can develop the skills, the boundary skills, and we can talk about those, to deal with provoking situations, difficult situations, painful situations.
Oh, so good. Yes. And something that you said piqued something interesting for me, where people that complain a lot, that has to do with boundaries. That is fascinating. I'd love to delve more into that, because there are many people who, will constantly have issues with communication with others, and it's always someone else's fault. Always. They're not being heard. People are disrespecting them. Whatever the issue may be, it's always that, there's always miscommunication going on, and yet they're the one that's in the center of that miscommunication always. And I find that a lot with people that are very unhappy with what they do. Let's say they're a counselor. but they constantly complain about their patients. And I'm sick of working with these people. That's just an example. But I always think, well, what in what you said about that having something to do with boundaries, what does that have to do with boundaries?
The complaining component?
So yes, the complaining component, that I'm doing a job or something's going on in my life and it's chronic and I chronically complain about it and people constantly, quote unquote, misunderstand me about it. What does that have to do with a boundary?
That has to do with someone who either has no boundaries or who has poorly defined boundaries. So generally speaking, there are several positions with regard to boundaries, but the four that I look at in the work that I do would be no boundaries, poorly defined boundaries, barriers, and then of course healthy boundaries. And so no boundaries, there's going to be no differentiation between self and others. We don't know our feelings are separate from others. So if someone is upset with us, then we get upset with ourselves. Or if someone is upset with their boss, then we're upset with their boss. And so there's no sense of where I end and where you begin. And in there's no sense of control over things that happen to us. So it's very easy to move into the victim role, that they wouldn't let me off work early, or they didn't pay me for the overtime, or they dropped their dogs off at my house and expected me to take care of them for the 10 days that they were in Europe. So there's no boundaries. Good comes in, bad comes in, good goes out and bad stays out. The next one that we have would be poorly defined. So people are trying to have boundaries, but they feel guilty when they do it. They get aggressive when they do it. There's no follow through. So I say, if you return my tent without the tent poles, I'm not going to be able to lend it to you again, or something along those lines. And yet the next week they ask for a tent and you lend them your other tent and comes back again without tent poles. So we have poorly defined boundaries. People don't follow through. One of the most dangerous ones, because it prevents intimacy and it prevents attachment and really fosters anger, resentment, bitterness in a lockdown, are barriers. And we see barriers, Kristen, when there's been abuse. And the sad thing, the difficult thing, the potentially pathological thing with barriers is folks do it to keep the bad out. Unfortunately, they also keep the good out, meaning the good of others. But the most destructive part when there's abuse in the history is they keep the bad in. So with a barrier, the attempt is to keep the bad out, but actually as a victim of abuse, they keep the bad in because there's no room to bring healing into the light. There's no room to bring new experiences. So we have no boundaries, we have poor boundaries, and we have barriers. And so when there's room for growth, or I say opportunities to grow, and the person is not quite there, they're going to complain. They're going to complain about people coming to their house. They're going to complain about their job. They're going to complain about their brother-in-law. They're going to complain about their house. They're going to complain about their landlord. And again, therapeutically, what I'm going to come back to is, what is your truth and what would it look like if this was resolved? What is your need and how can we communicate this need? So when your boss says, I need you to stay until 10 o'clock tonight and your stop time is 5, how can you say, while I would like to be able to do that, and I understand there's a need on the table, I'm unable to do that. I have commitments and I'm not able to do that for you tonight. People feel that they can't do that. They feel like they feel guilty, they feel bad, they're afraid they're going to hurt their feelings, they're afraid they're going to lose their job.
Right.
And so they disregard their truths. They disregard their truths. And when we disregard our truth and give our power away, that makes us angry. And so that's going to be the fuel behind the complaining.
Yes. And how about just regular, someone really does something hurtful and we get angry about it. So there's a place where it's healthy to say, yes, this was inappropriate behavior. Is it giving your power away to get angry about it?
Oh, heavens no.
Okay.
Heavens no. In fact, scripture tells us to be angry, but do not sin, correct? Anger is a healthy emotion. That being said, the healthier our boundaries, the less we're going to be angry. Because when we have healthy boundaries, we're going to teach people who we are and how we operate. For instance, good or bad, right or wrong, I teach my friends and family that I don't like talking on the phone. And especially Monday through Friday in the evening, if you phone me, in all likelihood, I'm not going to answer the phone. If it's an emergency, keep phoning me. I will answer the phone. But I teach people that this is how I operate, so that if they do phone me and I don't answer the phone, they have an awareness that this is who Lisa is and how she operates. So with boundaries, we're going to be proactive. We're going to teach people what works for us and what doesn't work for us. So in the general scheme of things, the healthier our boundaries, the less anger we're going to experience. However, when we have our boundaries and someone crosses them, someone does something that makes us angry, or we feel violated, or we feel taken advantage of, boundaries give us the skills to be able to confront that, to be able to say, oh goodness,
this is not okay. Yeah.
This is not okay. Yeah. When I, what would be a good example? If you're at the office and, oh, that wouldn't be a good example. What's a good example?
Scratch. I can give you a good one.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, so an example I would give would be, all right, so you offered to do something for someone, you're doing it to help them in some way, and they pick it apart. Everything that you've done, it isn't good enough. It's not up to their standards. There's something wrong with this entire thing that you're doing for them, and then they complain about it, and you get to a point where you just say, you know what, I'm done. That's it. I did a nice thing for you. It isn't good enough for you. Good luck on your journey, and I'm not going to do this for you again.
That's a great example. A great example. And so someone has asked you to help them, you go and you give it your all, and you're on the receiving end of judgment and criticism.
Yes.
And truly, with boundaries, we want to be aware of, is someone judgmental and critical, and then how do we communicate that? So in a situation like that, what we would do is we confront. Now, I generally teach that the goal of confrontation is to increase intimacy, meaning to increase understanding, to increase the health of the relationship, to teach the other person about who we are and how we operate. So if someone asked me to help out, say to volunteer at an event and to serve food or to help prepare food and serve it, and I was on the receiving end of judgment and criticism that was unfounded, what I would say is that while I understand, you have your opinions and you have your thoughts, what does not work well for me is to be on the receiving end of judgment and criticism. I would teach them, if there's something in what I'm doing that would work better for you, I'm open to hearing that. But when you attack my character, that's not something that works well for me. Or another example in that line, Kristen, would be, is if someone asks if we want to do something and we say, no, I'm going to pass on that. And they come back with a manipulative statement. If you were really a good friend, if you cared about me. The other day, I had a friend who was going through a difficult time and said, Lisa, I really need to come over. And this is probably a Wednesday night. It's a couple weeks ago. And I was not available. I had some family commitments. And I said, oh, I hear you. I know that this divorce is uncomfortable and really painful, and I definitely want to be there for you. I'm not available tonight, but how about Friday night? And in there was a pause, and there was well, don't I matter to you? Aren't I as important as what's going on at home? And I would say that what I need from you is to let my yes be yes and my no be no. Yes. What I need to tell you is that while I would like to be available tonight, unfortunately, I'm not. And I always teach, if we can give another option, such as I will be available for you on Friday, then we move from there. But if someone is consistently manipulating our yes into our no, or our no into a yes, or we're on the receiving end of judgment and criticism, we want to call them on that. We want to give them an opportunity to grow and understand our operating system. And if they don't, unfortunately, we may lose that relationship. We may choose not to spend time with them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think too, when someone uses those manipulation tactics to, you say to them, this is not okay. You could have just, called me, or we could have had a conversation about what you're unhappy about between you and I, but instead they go and complain to everybody else about it and try to get you in trouble with, let's say, your work or your whatever, because of this judgment, criticism, instead of coming directly to you about it. I have a real problem with that too.
Absolutely. And some other, some things that we want to look out for in our relationships or in our interactions with other people or friends and family. We want to look at, do I experience, or do others seem to report the resentment? Do we see bitterness? Do we see depression because of poor treatment or poor boundaries? Oftentimes people can present with anxiety or panic because they feel they have no control, over what's going to come toward them, or how they can influence the hours that they work or the things that they lend or the people that they host. Oftentimes when people don't have good boundaries, again, they're going to have that blame shifting that we're talking about, not taking responsibility. Mm-hmm. We can see people moving into the victim role, that I had no choice. I was late for work, so I was driving fast, and I got a speeding ticket because I was late for work, and that stupid cop pulled me over. Well, right. I was speeding and I was late for work. Two things that I do have responsibility over. Oftentimes, too, when we don't have boundaries, how that will present is a feeling of obligation. So we feel obligated to say yes to people. We feel like we owe them a debt, or people feel in debt to us. We'll see procrastination. We'll see incredible dependency. So all of those are things that are going to present either in ourselves or others when boundaries need to be addressed. But the beautiful thing with boundaries is that we can grow. I mean, there's skills that we use. I tell people that we don't either have boundaries or we don't have boundaries. If those symptoms that I'm talking about arrive, they're indications that there's room to grow. I like to tell my clients, there's an opportunity to grow here. But boundaries are something that we use, and we use them for us. So sometimes when people are new with boundaries, they will throw that, this is my boundary, and it's something that I'm doing to you. Right. And, you can't do that. That's my boundary. And what's really important to remember is that boundaries say what I will and will not do. They're what I'm in charge of. Control says what you will and will not do. So if you are living with a spouse who's abusing alcohol or drugs, and my boundary is you need to stop drinking in order for us to stay in a relationship, that's not a boundary. That's control. What that's going to look like in a boundaried sense is I can no longer expose myself to this dynamic. If you are going to choose to continue in that behavior, I am going to need to put geographical space and time between the two of us. So the nice thing about boundaries is we have full control, we have full power. Whereas in reality, we have no control, no power over other people, places, or things.
Let's talk about people who, do have those shaky boundaries and they haven't learned how to exercise that muscle. They are, I look at it like there's a lot of self-sabotage that goes on sometimes with people where they don't have good boundaries. They don't know what a healthy boundary is. They either have none or they have barriers. And it's always someone else's fault. And good things can happen to them. Kind of like that story where there's a man drowning and, people throw him a life raft. People throw him get a boat to come by. Someone comes by on a jet ski. Oh, no, I don't need any help. I'm fine. God's going to save me. And the guy finally drowns and he ends up, talking to God and says, why didn't you save me? And God said, I sent you a lifeboat. I sent you a raft. I sent you a jet ski.
Absolutely.
So
but you didn't communicate your need.
Exactly. And then they're constantly in this victim role of, people aren't respecting me. I'm not getting what I want. And they don't see that they're the one that's at the center of that constantly. And to me, that seems like, I don't know, fear of success or self-sabotage or childhood wounds that they're not willing to actually look at. Then they'll do everything else other than actually address what the real issue is.
Well, and absolutely. And I'll talk a little bit about, how to develop boundaries here in a moment. But to address that question, we have to be able to know what our needs and wants are. We have to be able to know who we are and who we are not, and then to communicate that need. So there are a vast, many, many reasons why people would not, reach out for that lifeboat, that jet ski, or what have you. But not knowing how or not knowing what our need is, right. Or fear of rejection and abandonment. And this is going to sound really odd, but when I'm teaching people boundaries and I'm teaching them to identify their nurturing needs or to communicate their operational needs, what I teach them is I say, I want you to say, I need a hug and I can hear no. I'm wondering if you'd like to go to the opera with me on Wednesday, and I can hear no. I would like to go for a mountain bike ride with you, or I'd like to join you and your friends on a mountain bike ride, and I can hear no. And the reason I do that is fear of rejection, fear of abandonment is probably the greatest fear of human existence.
Wow.
And one of the main things that prohibits people from communicating their needs, that fear of abandonment, that fear of rejection. So when they learn to say, I'm wondering if I can join you on Wednesday, and I can hear no, they prepare themselves to hear yes and to hear no. And the no is honoring their boundaries. So instead of interpreting the no as a rejection, they can experience it as a reflection of the other person's position, not as a personal rejection of self.
Interesting. I'm of course thinking of all the ways in which I need to improve in this area too.
we are all always growing our boundaries. It's not a rigid thing. It's fluid, and boundaries change over time. And there's something that we use on a daily basis. It's like drinking water. We all need it on a daily basis, and boundaries the same thing. And so if we don't have boundaries, or if we're thinking, my goodness, I am resentful, bitter, blame shift, I complain all the time, I hate my job, I kicked the dog, I threw the cell phone, and you're thinking, help, I need a boundary. The first place that we want to start with boundaries or developing boundary skills is gaining that awareness. We want to look at where in my life am I complaining? Am I blame shifting? Am I feeling like a victim? Am I feeling taken advantage of? Or where do I manipulate others? Where do I control others? Where do my fears and insecurities? Where do I use anger? And in that gaining awareness, we want to become aware of our feelings, our bodies, our attitudes, our behaviors, our thoughts, our abilities, everything about us. And what I say is that it's not right or wrong, it just is. Because until we own the totality of who we are not able to know the truth and then to be able to bring that into relationship. And so we want to gain awareness. We want to define self. We want to have clarity. Back when I lived in the big city, Nordstrom, our big department store, has this half annual sale that starts at 6:30 in the morning, 6:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And I'm not a department store gal. Okay, I'm a mountain gal. And so when my girlfriend would say, hey, Lisa, I want to pick you up at 5:30 and we're going to be at the half annual sale and we're ready to go, I'm able to say, well, right on, you go at it. And thank you for thinking of me. However, I'm going to pass. I'm going to be out kayaking at the cabin, but I sure appreciate you thinking of me. Whereas others might say, oh, yes, okay, I'll go, and then cancel at the last minute, or make up a lie and then feel poorly about it. So we want to gain awareness. We want to define who we are. And it's just as important to define who we are not. And to realize, and I think we've touched upon this a little bit here today, that the most basic boundary word is no.
Yeah.
No.
Took me a long time to get comfortable with that word, and I still have my issues with it.
Well, and sometimes because just saying no, doesn't work. Lisa, would you like to go to dinner with us tonight? No. I mean, it sounds abandoning, it sounds rejecting. So some phrases that I encourage us to use is that, we want to flood it with grace. We want to thank you so much for thinking about me. That means a lot to me. However, it will not work for me to join you tonight, but I really appreciate you thinking about me. So, different ways to say no are, that won't work well for me. I can't make that happen. That's not something I'm on board with. I can't support that. So we want to develop, softer ways to say no. We want our no to be no and our yes to be yes. It's the most basic boundary that we use is no. And then, of course, if we're challenging ourselves to develop boundaries, we really want to challenge ourselves to a couple of things. One, we want to abandon all judgment and criticism of self and others. Abandon all judgment and criticism of self and others. It doesn't mean that we may not like a situation or we may not be supportive of a situation, but when we judge and criticize, we stop getting to know. And that's both with self and others. We want to stop being in the victim role. We want to think, what is my responsibility in here? As adults, particularly in America, we have choices. And people move out of that position and feel like they don't have choices. And that's where that anger, bitterness, and resentment can show up.
Absolutely.
We want to remember that boundaries are difficult. They take persistence. We want to be purposeful, and boundaries aren't something we do to other people. Boundaries are something that we use, for ourselves. And we want to be able to set limits.
That makes so much sense too. That there's something for you, not what you're doing to someone else. And where that makes the most sense to me is, I may say yes to something with someone, because I trust them, I feel comfortable, it's my choice. But the same activity or the same request from someone else, I'll say no to because I don't know them. I may not trust them yet. So boundaries, that speaks to where it is something for you, because you also can have a choice as to where your boundaries are depending on the situation, the person, and so on. Am I on the right track with that?
Oh, absolutely. So, for instance, I'm out here in the mountains, and so we camp a lot, and I have a plethora of camping gear. And there are certainly people who would say, Lisa, may I borrow a tent or a backpacking tent, or you're a camper? And I absolutely would say, hands down, without a shadow of a doubt, yes, please tell me what time you want to meet me, and you're good to go. I may have someone else who has either demonstrated that they are not trustworthy or they're not responsible with my gear or with other gears. And I would say, oh, I appreciate you reaching out to me. I'm not able to make that happen. What I usually will do is to say, however, I do know that you can rent it from this facility and they have good gear. Follow me? So I don't need to defend or explain, which is a really important part of boundaries. One of the areas where boundaries break down is the individual defends and explains themselves, which just gives the other person merit to dissect it. So I teach that when you have a boundary, you don't need to defend or explain. You don't need to say, last time I lent you my tent, it came back without its bag and without its poles. Therefore, I'm not going to lend it again. That's not necessary. That just makes us feel better. So I say defending and explaining only satisfies the person doing it. But what's cleaner is to say, oh, yes, I have lots of gear. However, I'm not in a position to lend that at this time. However, I happen to know that backcountry sports has an assortment of things to rent, and I hope you have a fantastic time. So yes, they're not rigid, they're fluid, and in that that they're active, not reactive. One of the most basic boundaries, in fact, the most basic boundary, is that of geographical space and time. And in this conversation here, we're thinking, mostly our conversation is about boundaries toward others. But we have to remember that as important as boundaries toward others is boundaries with self. And so if someone asks us something, no matter what it is, can you work for me on Tuesday? Do you want to go to this event or this show? Or can you watch my dog for 6 weeks while I'm gone? I always say to people, we want to give that boundary to ourselves. We want to give ourselves a geographical space and time so that we can check in with what is the truth in my heart, and then how can I communicate that in a loving, kind way. So, for instance, if someone says, oh, Lisa, I wonder if you can give me a ride to the airport. My flight leaves at 6 a.m. And you think, oh, my goodness, that means I'm going to be up at 4, right? And so inside, your monkey brain's going, that sounds dreadful, right? I don't want anything to do with that. So in respecting a boundary with self, if we don't feel that we're able to answer it on the spot, which when we're building boundaries, none of us do. We really have to be methodical. We really have to be intentful. So what I teach is say, let me take a look at what's going on that day, or let me check in with my family, or let me look at my schedule, and I'll get back with you. So that's going to honor your space and time to be able to address that in a truthful and loving manner. And so you get off the phone with them and you think, that is dreadful. That means I have to be up at 3 a.m. and I have to be at work at 7. That's not good at all. And so we're going to use this skill of coming back. We're going to flood it with grace. And we're going to say something along the lines that, I understand that you need a ride to the airport. However, the timing of that is not going to work for me. However, I have used the airport shuttle in the past, and you might find that very helpful. Follow me? So giving that boundary with ourselves gives us the space and time to be able to deal with things that come our way in a kind, loving, and respectful fashion.
So it's a great determiner when you're dealing with someone who you do a lot of favors for. They have asked for favors, and maybe it's a new relationship, or it's one, that is had healthy times, and maybe it's in an unhealthy patch. And so you've said yes a lot. And then the moment that, you ask for a favor in kind, they continually say no, 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 no. And I've had people say, well, I'm just holding a boundary because I don't do that for people. And I think, okay, well, good for you. And I'm now making a choice not to continue to do favors for you because you don't return any of them.
Well, especially if we're feeling resentful. So if we're feeling resentful and bitter, then we own that we're powerless over who they are and how they operate. We need to accept their boundaries, whether we like them or not. But if we are having resentment and bitterness in our heart, then we need to modify our boundaries so that we don't. It's
Right.
our responsibility to do that. In fact, one of the things that I teach people as well with boundaries is to be sure and display self-control. And so the working man's definition of that is, when in doubt, wait. So if
Yeah.
you've taken your friend 12 times to the airport and you ask for it once and they say, oh no, I'm not interested in that, and you want to say, what? I've taken you 12 times. If we want to attack them, or when in doubt, wait. Or the simpler version of that is zip it up. Now, what I'm not saying is to stuff our emotions, but when we're beginning to implement boundaries, things hit us, they provoke us, they throw us off base. And if we don't know how to answer it, wait. So when in doubt in a situation, whether they're asking us for a commitment or we have a strong emotional response, wait. Take that geographical space and time. Think through, what is the truth in my heart, and how can I communicate this in a loving, respectful, and kind manner? Because again, boundaries are about what I will and will not do. And if my boundary is, I don't want to explode on people, I don't want to curse, I don't want to be reactive, I don't want to be attacking, we have to understand that we're human beings as well, and things really provoke us. So if someone left my gate open and my dog got hit by a car, you can be well assured that I'm not going to go, well, in the future, can you please leave the gate locked? Right? I'm going to have to set a boundary with myself to say, I'm not able to address this right now. I'm really upset. And my words likely will not be productive, and they likely will not be kind. Follow me? So it's that boundary with self that is so very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Ooh, that's a good one. Exactly. And as I've gotten older, I've had people say, man, you are so much more patient than I would be about this particular situation. And I think, well, are they saying that I'm a pushover, or is that really a compliment? And I do what you said. I take it to my heart and I think, okay, well, knowing how much I flew off the handle about things in younger years, because, I was younger, and how much now I wait, I think that I'm going to take that as a compliment.
Absolutely. Well, and in its most basic sense, Kristen, what you're doing is you're not giving your power away.
Yes.
You're not giving your power away.
You.
The other day I was on one of the circular phone calls where it's the automated assistant. I needed to change a payment source on my Verizon account. And we did this dance, and it took about 12 minutes each time, where I was transferred, dumped. Transferred, dumped. And I think after about 40 minutes, I'm thinking, this is quite frustrating. This is quite annoying. And so this is not working well for me. In fact, my blood pressure is rising and I want to throw the phone. So with boundaries, we're going to say, okay, what can I do different? So we're going to call customer service. Well, some people, when they do that dance, by the time they get a live person, they're going to lay into that live person.
Spray emotional bullets all over them.
Yeah. And so with boundaries, we want to honor the feeling. So with boundaries, it doesn't mean we don't feel. It means that we feel and then we communicate the need. And so what that's going to look like, for example, is to say, I'm wondering if you can help me. I'm extremely frustrated in that I've been doing a circular dance with the automated system, and I need your help. I need simply to change a payment card. And when we meet that person, we're sharing the feeling of frustration, but we're meeting them with kindness and love, and we're specifically stating our need. I need your help with this. I'm not being successful with the system. Not that stupid system is made to make people homicidal and I'm off my rocker. We're saying I'm not successful with it and I'm wondering if you can give me a hand. And when we have interactions like that, we feel better, they feel better, and we don't have to get off the phone angry and resentful about being tormented or abused or harassed by the automated system.
And also taking that out on a fellow human being. I mean, I really, because I did customer service for years, I'm still doing customer service. I am so nice and pleasant, and I make it a challenge for myself to really be the nicest person that they're going to deal with all day, because I know the calls that they get. And I get so much more done, and people willing to do so much more to make me happy in my customer service experience because I'm so nice. Well, also expecting that, hey, this does need to get done. But I remember watching someone in my family who has absolutely no boundaries whatsoever, just none. And they would run to the phone every time it rang, hoping that it was some kind of telemarketer so that they could launch into, how dare you call my home, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, that's really sad. That's really
Look
sad.
at all the power. Look at all the power that's given away in that, and negative power. And what you're telling me, Kristen, is that part of your operating system is to be kind and loving in all situations. And in that, but I want to point that out, because if we believe the world is out to get us, what we're going to bring into relationships is blame shifting and victim, and we're going to get that. But if we say, my truth is I want to be kind, loving, and respectful in all situations, even if I'm on the counterattack, because within my boundaries, I'm not going to give my power away. If someone runs me off the road, it's going to be upsetting and road rage, but I have full control of whether I get back on there and chase them down the highway. Follow me? I can say, that person's in a bad space, and I'm going to keep my space and distance from them, rather than taking it personally and believing I need to counterattack. And so, having that clarity of what's within my boundaries and how I'm going to operate, or where I'm going to give my power away, is essential in the implementation and the follow through. And so when we think of our operating system, how do I define myself? Do I define myself as running to the phone so I can, lay into the telemarketer? Or do I define myself as someone who wants to look for something to love and leave something lovable in every interaction that I have? And not that we don't feel, and not that we're some Pollyanna and we're above or angelic, but when we have that as our operating system, it gives us structure of how to navigate this thing we call life.
Absolutely. And you can choose to, I would say, just don't answer the phone. You know that it's going to be one of those calls, so just turn your ringer off. Since it's a home phone that's plugged in and you only have it because you use it for a medical device, then you know that 9 times out of 10 it's going to be some kind of telemarketer. Then turn the ringer off and don't answer it.
Well, and
that's your choice.
And there's never a shortage of opportunities to learn. So I've been practicing for 25 years, and I'd like to think that I've been teaching boundaries for that long. And the other day I was riding my bike. I rode bike quite a bit, and I have my earbuds in. We have a trail here, so I don't have to share it with traffic. And the phone rang, and I stopped, and I was in a construction zone, and I answered it. And the person needed to talk, but I wasn't able to talk because I'm on my bike on the side of the road in a construction zone. And they were irritated and upset with me. And this is a family member. And I felt badly because I couldn't be there. And I got back on my bike and I said, Lisa, dong, why did you answer the phone?
Right.
You are not in a position to talk. That's your responsibility. That was your choice. And so we're always looking at, where can I fine tune? Where can I grow? Every day we have an opportunity to redefine boundaries with self and boundaries with others.
Absolutely. I think about this. I live out in the country. I love it. I grew up in Los Angeles area, Southern California. I grew up in traffic. I choose not to have that stress added to my life. So I live out in the country, and I'll be on the most gorgeous country road, enjoying this beautiful drive, and inevitably there's somebody that gets irritated, even though there's hardly any traffic, somebody that gets irritated and has to do some sort of crazed, totally irresponsible move to go around me or to tailgate me. And I think a lot of it is being with boundaries is to be very present in your life instead of just reacting out of your limbic brain, your lizard brain about everything. And so I sit and I think, okay, here's a challenge for me. Are you going to shake your head at them and do some kind of shame finger that they're not even paying attention to you as they drive by? Or are you just going to be like, whatever, go around me, have a great day?
One of my favorites, Kristen, was several years ago when I was still living in Seattle. And it was Christmas time, so that'll put a context to it. And it was Christmas time at Costco. So we got a double whammy going on there.
Yeah.
And the lines there, anybody who goes to Costco knows that the lines go on forever, particularly in Christmas. And I was approaching the line and I had my basket full of goodies and stocking stuffers or whatever. And this person came running in front of me, nicked the front end of my car and jumped in front of me and looked back at me and said, well, I was ahead of you. I was ahead of you. And in that moment, if we have an operating system that you look for something to love and you leave something lovable in every situation, you're able to say, it's absolutely fine. Please, go ahead and go right ahead. It's absolutely fine. Whereas if our boundaries are poor and we're in blame shifting and we're victimizing, we might get in a fight over where we are in the traffic line of our Costco cart. And so the beautiful thing is it saves us the emotional reaction. You've heard me in previous podcasts talking about cortisol and the fight or flight.
Yes.
But the healthier our boundaries, the less likely we're going to be provoked, irritated, annoyed, and be reactive. So it's a win-win. I mean, I tell folks what reinforces the development of boundaries isn't that we control other people. It's that we don't give our power away. Our emotions stay more steady. We feel confident. We're not afraid of conflict. We're not afraid of confrontation. We're not afraid of criticism because we're going to take all of these things in. We're going to assess what piece can I take from that and how can I respond in a kind, loving, respectful manner? How can I respond in a way where I'm not losing self-control, where I'm maintaining the truth of who I am, where I'm making choices, where I'm aware of my feelings. And so it's a very empowering. What reinforces the continued growth of boundaries is that it feels good. It feels good.
Yes, it does. It feels good to be so present and aware and that you're choosing your behavior, that you have power over your emotions. Your emotions don't have power over you. It's a wonderful thing. And I love watching it in other people that I love. My ex-husband is a perfect example. He always is complaining about his phone. No matter how many phones he gets, it's the stupid phone that keeps doing things to him. And this is just him, and we can laugh about it because I've known him for 31 years, and something will happen where he picks up the phone and he immediately goes to say this stupid phone, and he's heard me enough say, how many phones have you had? They can't all be stupid.
Well, and that's actually a really good point, Kristen, too, because one of the things is that the healthier our boundaries get, the more aware we are of other people's opportunity for growth or needed opportunity for growth, the lack of boundaries.
Right.
So the healthier our boundaries get, the more we're able to see other people's need for growth. And it can be very difficult. And in fact, it can really create difficulty. And so again, what we want to practice, what I challenge is to have compassion in our heart, that as we are learning about boundaries and integrating them, when we see other people blame shift, that stupid phone or my stupid boss or that stupid cop who gave me a ticket. One of the things, and I kind of, again, I use my hands and we can't see them, but I take my hands as if I'm holding a basketball. Okay. So if you walk with me, I'm holding a basketball and I'm going to gently, figuratively want to give that basketball to the person who's complaining or blame shifting and victimizing. But in my words, the words that are going to accompany that basketball are what would work better for you in that situation. So he's complaining about his phone or they're complaining about their boss or not getting time off. I will say to them, what is it that you need? If this was resolved, what would that look like? Because then what we're doing with our loved ones is we're inviting them to go to their truth in their heart. We want to say our most common is, well, get a phone that works, or quit complaining, or, well, if you don't like your job, get a new one. Instead, what we want to say is, what kind of job would you enjoy? What kind of boss would be a comfortable one? And we want to get our loved ones, friends, and family to begin to think from inside out. What is their truth? And that's where we want to then attach. So It's interesting. The healthier our boundaries get, the more difficult it is to be around people who don't have boundaries. Sometimes, I have had a relationship once where a friend of mine, an acquaintance of mine, very much complained, but very much talked negatively about others at all times. And I started off by not engaging in it. So she would talk about so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, and I would listen. I wouldn't engage. My boundary was, for me, I wasn't going to participate in gossip. And I would say what would make things better or what would make you feel better with that person. And eventually it came to a place where she wasn't responding. And I had to say, and this is confrontation, that though I very much enjoy spending time with you, it's very difficult for me to be on the receiving end of hearing, a litany of the negative aspects of others. And I will say, good or bad, right or wrong, it just doesn't work well for me. And so I would invite you, when you're with me, to not do that. Well, we can do those things, but again, we're powerless over other people, places, and things. And eventually that is a relationship that I chose not to spend time with, because that was an operating system that I found offensive or couldn't connect with, couldn't attach to. So sometimes people will say, I'm afraid to have boundaries. I'm afraid I will lose a friend. And I say, you might lose a relationship. You might lose a relationship.
But was it a good one anyway?
Well, it's doubtful that you'll lose a friend. It's
yeah, that's true. Oh, such a good, yes, exactly. Such a good point. Such a good point. Absolutely. And, there are years where I was negative. I remember in the middle of my divorce, I don't know who wanted to be around me at that time in my life. I'm sure there were many people that were like, bye-bye, Kristen. And that's fine. I'm human. I learned, for the most part, but.
Well, but true in that situation, Kristen, as well, is, cornerstone to our truth. We want to educate our friends and families if we're in a difficult space. I mean, one of my favorite terms is, I'm in a funky place. It's a nondescript, not on top of my game, maybe tired, maybe stressed, maybe depressed, maybe struggling with something, maybe hormonal, maybe just in a funky place. But with boundaries, if we are in that place, we want to share with our friends and families that, you know what, I'm in a funky space, or I'm dealing with this divorce. I'm not on top of my game. And I just need you to be aware of that. Not so it's an excuse to be unkind or disrespectful, but just so that they know that's our truth. Good or bad, right or wrong, that's our reality at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh. Dr. Lisa Day, thank you again so much. This was such a good conversation. I love it when we have our back and forth and we use examples. People, listeners love that too, because, it's certainly good to hear, you can look at boundaries and so on. But when you hear what happens in our everyday lives and how those are challenging for us, people feel like, oh, okay, well, good. I'm not just listening to a lecture. I'm listening to human beings who are fallible and have their own issues.
For sure. So,
thank you for bringing this topic to our attention. I'm sure that we will talk about it again. And I want to make sure our listeners know where they can find out more about you. And everyone can go to www.meierclinics.com, and you can find Dr. Lisa Day on there. And Lisa, tell our listeners just a little bit about your background so they know what that doctor is about.
Oh, you betcha. So the doctor, well, it's a compound component here. So I'm both a registered nurse, and then I have my PhD in behavioral med clinical psychology. Been doing this for 25 years. Love every minute of it, practice everything that I teach, and have been with Meier Clinics for all of those 25 years.
That's amazing to me. That's such a testament to how great that place is to work.
It's nothing like it. It's quite a blessing and quite a privilege, for sure.
I know when we do our recordings with Dr. Paulmeier every week, we just feel like, how did we luck out that we get this amazing human being? And then now with you, how lucky am I that I get to share space with these incredible people every week? It's pretty awesome.
Well, and Kristen, how blessed are we all that we can put some of these concepts out there so that everybody would have access to how can I have a healthier relationship? How can I have healthier connection and attachment? Because really, at the end of the day, life is about comfort, connection, attachment, joy, meaningful life experiences. And the tools of boundaries give us the wherewithal, the tools to be able to navigate that in a way that works.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. And thank you to our listening family for another edition of The Clinical Christian.
Thank you, Kristen.
Hi, this is Dr. Paulmeier of the Meier Clinics. We're reminded in Jeremiah 29:11 that God has good plans for each of us, plans to give us a future and a hope. When you're going through difficult times, it's important to remember that important truth. Our Christian counseling staff at the Meier Clinics will also come alongside you with encouragement and biblically based counseling.
This message is sponsored by the Meier Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
We hope
hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meier Clinics, please visit our website at meierclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.